Because of the challenges of travel and the challenges of finance, numbers will remain, kind of challenged, certainly for this year, maybe for a little time to come. But, symbolically, as Laura said, it's absolutely vital and important that we plant a flag in the ground and, do that as a staging point to move forward, I think.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I am Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the only publication in North America exclusively dedicated to covering theatrical exhibition. Joined this week once again by our deputy editor, Rebecca Pahle, and our chief analyst, Shawn Robbins. This is the first of two special CineEurope editions, proudly presented by our partners at Cinionic. Cineonic's future-ready enhanced services and technology solutions provide compelling cinema experiences, peace of mind, and financial flexibility. Today, with more than 95,000 projectors installed globally, cinemas around the world trust laser projection by Cinionic to power the next generation of moviegoing. Visit Cinionic at this year's CineEurope and discover why theaters look to Cinionic to provide the solutions of tomorrow today. And with that, guys, let's jump right into this because we've got a lot to cover here, and we will be joined later in this episode by the leadership of UNIC. We have UNIC CEO Laura Houlgatte-Abbott and the president of UNIC, Phil Clapp. But before we get into that, let's look at this box office recap. Rebecca, Shawn, there's a couple of big headlines here. Let's start with Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Rebecca. This is the fourth consecutive weekend where that film stays at the top spot.
The big headline this week, of course, is that Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is now the highest grossing film of the pandemic era. It passed competition Black Widow last Friday with its 13 million weekend gross from just under 4,000 locations. It now has a domestic total of 196.2 million. That brings its global total to 363.1 million. Guys, in its fourth week, it only had a 39% drop, which is really still a pretty modest drop, pretty solid hold, considering that the film at this point has been out for a month and out only in theaters for a month. In second place, we have another theatrically exclusive release, Universal's Dear Evan Hansen, opening to 7.4 million from about 3,300 locations. Guys, this one didn't do so well. Shawn, I think correct me if I'm wrong, that 7.4 falls largely in line with your expectations. This film debuted at the Toronto International Film Festival, and I think it's safe to say it had some pretty negative feedback. Daniel, I know you saw and really enjoyed the film.
Yeah, I can get into, I think, my reactions to it, and I think maybe my confusion as to some of the reaction around this title. But let's talk numbers first. Shawn, what are your big takeaways from the number one and number two in the market this past weekend?
Well, I think with Shang-Chi, it really is just kind of a continuation of what we've known for the past month. I mean, this is another Marvel movie it's a crowd pleaser. It's the type of event that I think really the industry and moviegoers have waited for. Now, it's also a very different film from Dear Evan Hansen, which we saw an example of a musical underperforming earlier this summer in The Heights. And it's always been a genre that's very hit or miss. I mean, that's really the simplest way to put it. To me, I think this performance really underscores a few things. Number one, even before the pandemic, we had seen a very quick turnaround in the appeal of certain young adult films that catered toward a certain audience. And I think in this movie's particular case, even though it had a very diehard fan base to some extent of the stage play, this was a very dramatic film and maybe not the kind of escapism that a lot of people, even young adults who are going back to theaters right now, are really in the mood to see at the moment. So I think it might be less of a commentary on the quality of the film, even though we know reviews weren't exactly stellar, but less a commentary on that and more so a reflection of the audience mood right now.
I think that's a great point. This isn't a happy-go-lucky musical. This is a musical really about grief and about processing grief, which in itself I think is very hard to do. It's not really what we associate with a fun Broadway musical, especially on the big screen, right? It could be read as a very cynical musical about a young generation that's maybe a little bit too active on social media with unintended consequences, whose characters maybe aren't completely likable and are morally ambiguous. Now, I'm always interested in seeing things with a slightly different ambition, but as you note, Shawn, I can totally understand if that's really doesn't line up to what folks on a general audience sense want to see. And I think the reviews definitely underscored that.
It's a far cry from something like The Greatest Showman, where you have the lead character certainly
Right.
go through his dark night of the soul, but everything kind of comes out well in these big, glorious dance sequences. So,
yeah, if we look at the demographics, Rebecca, it's actually a little bit interesting here. 62% of that audience is female, as opposed to 38%, which is male, which is a great number as we get to see this split. But then we look at it in context of that 7.4 million opening weekend. It reminds me of what you've been saying, Shawn, for quite some time now, that female adult audience is the one that's taking a little bit longer to return. How much of a factor do you think that played into this opening weekend performance? And do you think that's a factor that a title like West Side Story has to worry about come December?
What that means for West Side Story, that's a big question, because that's, almost 3 months away, 2.5 months, I would say at this point. It's a Spielberg film, so it's going to have that going for it, and it can attract potentially a lot of that older audience. The question is that going to be a big enough movie to bring out some of those people that haven't gone back to theaters yet? And maybe, that might not even be a topic by the time Christmas hits. I think a lot can happen.
I mean, seeing that 71% of the people who saw Dear Evan Hansen on its opening weekend were under the age of 34, definitely concerning, I think, over the next couple of weeks for those films that will mainly seek to attract that kind of older female audience. But I got to agree with you, Shawn. I hope and I'm confident that by the time West Side Story hits, the conversation will be different.
Now let's move on to some overseas numbers here. We spoke about Dune's overseas debut last week. This week, Rebecca, it keeps on having some traction. Could you go over its performance in some of its top markets?
Yeah, it actually still continued to screen, adding a few markets, bringing its total of international markets up to 32, where globally it screened on just under 8,000 screens, adding 26.8 million to its global cume. Its top markets continue to be Russia, earned 15 million in the second weekend. It's really appearing to hit there in the Russian market quite well. France, $14 million second weekend cume, again, very good. Followed by Germany with 10.2 million, Italy with 5.2 million, and Spain with 4.9 million. Of course, the asterisk with all of those is that when Dune came out in those markets, it came out in a theatrically exclusive way, whereas in the United States, that will not be the case.
Shawn, looking at this performance, let's start with Dune overseas. What do you think we can learn from that traction, even though it's theatrically exclusive, as Rebecca mentions? That's not something that the film is going to count on here domestically.
Well, I think in Dune's case, probably at this point, we can look at earlier openers that have kind of come out this year, Fast 9, anything action related. Everything I would say that Dune is telling us from its overseas performance is essentially telling us what we would be able to expect from it if it were theatrical only in North America. Of course, that's the wrench in all of this, is that it won't be. So, Dune opens to a little bit over 7 million, I think, in a country like France, whereas Fast 9 opened to 9 million. If you just do a straight line comparison, that would tell you, in theory, Dune should probably open somewhere around 50 to 60 million in North America. That's not going to be the case necessarily, though, because a lot of people know they'll be able to watch it for free at home. But I think the positive sign is that it is living up to that expectation as an international friendly type of blockbuster film. And even though we aren't going to see those usual kinds of numbers, and certainly the numbers Warner Brothers wanted to see for this outside of the pandemic, it's probably at this point an encouraging sign for getting that second part made.
Shawn, you comfortable giving us a number, giving us a ballpark here of what you think Dune might land at in North America?
It's still fairly early. Tickets aren't even on sale yet, so that that could really change things. Our range up until this point has been on the high end, close to that 50 million spot where Godzilla vs. Kong was at. On the low end, something more like a 30 million that Blade Runner 2049 opened to about 4 years ago. That is kind of something we have to brace ourselves for, given that this is still a niche property. You can put a big cast in it, you can put a lot of money behind it, but ultimately, especially in this competitive landscape, that's the question. Will this relatively unknown IP outside of a very, very targeted fan base turn out for it, as James Bond and Halloween and Venom are probably still dominating a lot of screens come mid-October?
Well, speaking of Venom, guys, I am super excited because it is now official that Venom will be my first film that I am seeing at a drive-in movie theater ever in my life.
Awesome.
That's awesome. That's nice. So you're going opening weekend?
I am. I'm going opening weekend. It's drive-in. It's odd. The drive-in that I'm going to up in Warwick, New York, is one of their double features is Candyman and the Addams Family 2. Which seems a bit, but when you have a limited number of films, it's official. I have a rental car. I'm doing my very first drive-in, so I'm super. And Venom just seems like a drive-in type of movie to me. That kind
totally
of
does
fun.
Yeah.
Like I want to be hooting and hollering and yelling and reacting to things.
So, Shawn, in terms of forecasting, we're a little bit closer to Venom, obviously opening this weekend alongside another title skewing maybe male, young adult to adult, The Many Saints of Newark. How do you think this weekend shapes up? Because these look like two titles opening domestically, going for a very similar target audience?
Maybe, to an extent. I think, obviously, the advantage is in Venom's favor by quite a stretch. And to me, we just have to look at the first film for that, because on opening weekend, 71% of its audience was 25 or under. That is the wheelhouse of movies right now.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you want for it to coming out.
I always knew that I had the spirit of a teenage boy.
I wonder how much of that 71% overlaps with the dudes on Twitter that put like as their image icon, like pictures of the Joker. Are Joker guys the same guys as Venom guys? They have a very similar under 25 dude fandom online that is just fervent.
I think Joker guys are maybe more like Fight Club guys.
Oh, okay.
Slightly a little
different.
more, little less of a sense of humor about it.
Definitely a Venn diagram there. But in terms of box office, Shawn, before we get too much into this rabbit hole, where are you putting Venom for this opening weekend?
At this point, and as we're releasing this episode on Thursday, it'll probably be out just a few hours before our final forecast. So check out that article, little tease there. But so we'll have our final numbers there. As of right now, on Tuesday, when we're recording, our range has been about 45 to 65 million. And I'm increasingly leaning on the higher end of that. I think we're going to see some diminished returns from the first movie. If it can hit 80 million, that would be incredible. But we also have to look at the fact that the first movie opened leading into somewhat of a holiday, Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday, so that helped out Sunday box office the first time. That won't be there this time. The Sunday drop will be bigger. This is a sequel, probably will be more front-loaded. Previews start at 4 p.m., so that Thursday plus Friday gross will be an even higher share than the first movie, which I think started at 5 p.m. So not a huge difference, but maybe enough to matter. Just a lot of factors like these. I think we'll see a more front-loaded run, especially with the competition in mind opening in October. But this is the first big movie opening in a month since Shang-Chi. And even though I think the ticket sales and the release confirmation really kind of confused a lot of people here in the past week or two, it's really started to tick up. And social media activity, maybe not quite as strong as the first one, but it's really one of the strongest we've seen this year. So I would increasingly expect easily over 50 million. And maybe somewhere in that 60-ish range is very possible.
So where does that put something like The Many Saints of Newark? This is a title that is based out of a TV show that was, in many senses, iconic, but it last came out, when did The Sopranos end? Mid-2000s?
Yeah, it does seem like that demographic would certainly skew older than Venom. And I mean, I when it comes to seeing something in a theater versus seeing something on my TV screen, I think that the movie theater is preferable. But that said, you're looking at when people watch The Sopranos, they watched it on their TV screens. So for I would imagine for a lot of people, that association is there.
It's not good.
And
yeah.
I think maybe the optimistic comparison, which I would have applied again before the pandemic, if we had a dime every time we had to say that, but something like Downton Abbey, which was able to come out and beat expectations of the box
Very
office.
different shows, but
right. And an older audience that watched it at home. But now, especially with the Cry Macho and a few other films kind of hitting that similar target adult male audience, it's tough to say. I'm not sure. I think we could have looked at this movie as something like Black Mass back in 2015 when it opened at 22 million. I don't think it gets quite to those heights at this point under the circumstances.
Do you think it could open at 10 million, or are we looking at another single-digit HBO Max adult-leaning title?
That's, honestly, it's a coin flip. I think we haven't seen enough HBO Max titles lately hit that mark in order to confidently say that it can hit 10 million. I think the fan base is there to make it happen. But I think especially with how Cry Macho did a few weeks ago, that really just kind of was another data point that showed there is an audience out there just willing to watch these Warner Brothers movies at home right now.
Well, guys, thank you so much for that analysis. We will be back next week with more insights on the box office, and we will now be moving on to the CineEurope portion of the episode with our guests, Laura Houlgatte-Abbott and Phil Clapp. Laura, Phil, thank you so much for joining us here for this edition. Talking about CineEurope, talking about the European marketplace. It's always really interesting to check in with you guys, really since the beginning of this pandemic, 18, 19 months now of a global crisis for this industry. So starting from that perspective, knowing that we still are very much in the recovery phase, where does European exhibition find itself right now?
In a good place, I would think, compared to where we were last year around the same time. I feel like comparing that, to September 2020, when we all felt that, the second closing down was coming. We've had all our territories open now, since July. So that's 38 countries where cinemas have been allowed to reopen. We've had, releases coming out. We had audiences coming back in big numbers. And speaking about big titles, Dune being released, and of course, James Bond coming to our screens. So, hey, we're all very, very happy.
I'd echo that. I mean, I think we'll probably talk about CineEurope in a while, but when we gather in Barcelona next week, I think the message we want to give is one of thanks. I think thanks to governments that have provided funding to cinemas to allow them to retain staff and to get to the other side of this period. I think thanks to colleagues in the industry, be they, exhibitors showing strength and, support to each other, but also colleagues in the studios and distributors, those who showed faith in the industry at a time when maybe others didn't. But more than that, I think a message of confidence, a confidence that the recovery is underway. It's not going to be a straight line. There will be some setbacks along the way, and, they may differ from territory to territory. But I think, the direction of travel is now clear. And it's one which sees, a clear sign that audiences want to come back to cinema. They're confident to come back to cinema, and they find cinemas comfortable and safe places to be. And that as the weeks and the months roll on, will we get back to what we call normal? I don't know what normal is anymore, but I think certainly we'll be back to many of the things which we loved and some of the things we probably hated about the industry, which is all to the good, I think.
And it's, I think, an important thing to note that this is a recovery for any out-of-home entertainment destination, not just your cinemas. So as we're tracking consumer sentiment, I'm looking here especially at European sporting events. I saw the Anthony Joshua fight at Tottenham Stadium not too long ago. Great turnout there, seeing Champions League matches with crowds, people being out, talking to my European colleagues, just hearing them going out to restaurants, going out on the weekends. These are indicators that we are in a general recovery. One of those details that I'm always interested in speaking to international colleagues is the impact of some decisions made in the United States and what those ripple effects could be. We spoke with Moses Babatope from film house in Nigeria a couple of months back, and we asked him what was happening during Nigeria's own recovery, and he told us a story about Coming to America, the comedy sequel. They were very excited. It had great traction coming in, but after the film went day and date in the United States, they were hit with a massive piracy problem upon the film's theatrical release in Nigeria. So even though they got a lot of support in the distribution side of going out with a film in Nigeria, the impact of that availability in the US really created a big collateral damage for their earnings. Now, you mentioned Dune a second ago, Laura, and I have to ask this. We're seeing Dune making great business across top European markets: Russia, France, Italy, Spain, Germany. What does that success of Dune being released in a period when it is theatrically exclusive in select European markets tell us about the ripple effects of theatrical exclusivity?
Well, as I mentioned to you just before we press record, I don't like to draw conclusions, but I'm going to draw conclusions on this one, is that theatrical exclusivity, of course, is there to serve not only cinemas, but the whole industry, and to the benefit of audiences. You mentioned the impact of decisions made in the US. And, for us, for Europe, we saw that last year. That was a big example when we reopened during the summer. A huge majority of our members were, ready, were welcoming audiences, but we were missing the content. And we knew that we're paying the price somehow for, the pandemic situation in the US. So we all knew how interlinked we all were in the industry, and that we're now talking about a global industry. But I think this was really obvious last year when we had to go through 3 or 4 months without, very, very little content. And I think that this is something that we are, observing, of course, now. We can't ignore that. As you mentioned, we're very, very lucky with Dune, of course, because we are getting the full exclusivity on this. And I think that will make a massive difference on the figures of the films in terms of box office.
I think one of the things that the last 18 months has been an ample demonstration of is the global nature of the industry. Myself and Laura and others have spoken from a number of platforms over the last 2 or 3 years about, the increasing globalization of the industry, be that through consolidation, be that through the expansion of cinema operators or distributors into other territories. And over the last 18 months, particularly for those we represent in Europe, I think a source of frustration, but, I think understood, is the fact that many of the decisions on the release or the non-release of films or the movement of films have been driven by, the situation on the pandemic in the US or in Asia or in other territories. And even now, and I think we probably feel we're coming out of the shadow of the pandemic, decisions have been made in the last few weeks to move major titles into 2022. Primarily, it seems, because of the situation in the US. And so I think, the point I made about the recovery not being a linear one, there will be some missteps, some steps back, essentially. But, I think now there's the confidence that the slate is strong enough that it could withstand those kind of changes in a way it probably couldn't a year ago.
It's interesting having this conversation around CineEurope and understanding that we're having this convention still in the midst of a recovery. When I was at CinemaCon last month, it was very special, I think, for a lot of folks to meet with colleagues that they'd been speaking with, they'd been collaborating with over the phone. For you guys, as you're looking at CineEurope, what does having this event in person at this juncture of the recovery mean for the European exhibition industry?
I think it means a lot. I think it means that we are, all ready to have all of this in person. But as you mentioned, it's the first time for a lot of us that we're going to be able to see each other in flesh and bones and not only via a screen, which makes a massive, massive difference in our business. Not only, when we, of course, talk, and have our panels, but just to have those kind of informal conversations that really help our industry to, to thrive. And I saw that going to Cannes in July, to the French convention last week. The dynamic is very different. And you really also project a sign of confidence in the future by having the convention in person, showing that, we have the studios coming, presenting their slate. You have the whole exhibition community meeting, plus all our partners from the whole industry coming together. I think there's no better sign of, this is the full start of the recovery and the confidence that we can have in the future than having this.
Laura said it essentially. The one thing I'll say is that, clearly UNIC, UK Cinema Association, working with partners or sometimes without partners, we put on a whole range of events, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And I think, we always attempt to make them as engaging and valuable as possible to the people participating. But I don't think any of us are under any illusions that all the real value is from those kind of human interactions that Laura talked about. I'm not suggesting the cinema industry is unique in that regard, but I think there's a particular aspect to the cinema industry which thrives on people sharing experiences, sharing woes and sharing triumphs. And while, Box Office and others have done brilliant work in keeping everyone connected, it's still, kind of not the same, as it were. And I think, I think we recognize, and certainly colleagues at NATO and running CinemaCon recognize, that because of the challenges of travel and the challenges of finance, numbers will remain, kind of challenged, certainly for this year, maybe for a little time to come. But, symbolically, as Laura said, it's absolutely vital and important that we plant a flag in the ground and, do that as a staging point to move forward, I think.
Well, talking about those travel restrictions, I know it's been so difficult for event organizers right now to really move forward with a lot of these things. I was speaking with Andrew Sunshine from the Film Expo group earlier this week, and I asked him, you've been in this family organizing events your entire life. Is this the hardest one you guys have ever put on? And he said, without a doubt, this is without a doubt the most difficult event to go forward with. There are so many variables out there. Now, one of the best things of attending these conferences, and one of the things that I'm really looking forward to from CineEurope, is learning about some interesting case studies and initiatives from European markets that other exhibitors can learn from. For those folks that can't make it to the event, could you share some interesting case studies and initiatives that you've seen from your members?
We looked at compiling a lot of various audience initiatives, for example, that you can find on our website. And I can't remember how many hundreds there's there, but there is a lot. And we're trying, of course, CineEurope is for us the occasion to showcase, what our members have been doing, what the industry has been doing. So we're going to talk, as I mentioned, about content, about local content. We're going to have a executive roundtable. We're going to look at the future of the industry. But we're also going to talk about, you mentioned it, audiences. We're going to have a panel looking at what does the audience expect now, where we're going to share some, best cases. But, from, anything, home delivery of popcorn or whatever, from cinemas partnering with, some online platforms like Mubi and York Cinema in Germany, private cinema screenings in Sweden. I think you just have so many of these out there. It's really, really difficult to pick, just a few. But hey, teaser, you can go on the UNIC website, have a look at all our various documents. But also, we're going to publish our annual report next week, where we've been featuring the best of these. So if people want to learn more about them.
Just the one thing to add is, and this probably is something which is slightly unique about the cinema sector, the vast majority of people or venues or companies that UNIC represents, the vast majority of people the UK Cinema Association represents, and actually I think probably the vast majority of cinemas that any trade body represents, that's all they do. They are cinemas. They're not multi-function companies that if the tap is turned off of people coming to watch films in the cinema, they can rely on other revenue streams. So that kind of innovation, which Laura talked about, which you've seen in a variety of forms across a variety of territories and from a variety of different types of venues, I think has been driven by a recognition of the need to keep your existing audience engaged, and whether that's engagement through allowing them to enjoy their own at-home film experience, but still keeping a little bit of cinema by delivering popcorn to their home, or as Laura said, through partnering with online platforms, or, just one example from the UK, the Queen's Film Theatre in Belfast, which is a small local venue. They launched their own online streaming platform called the QFT Player to great success. And I think they probably will continue with that, although their core business will remain, be again, rather, the big screen. So what we've seen over the last 18 months is a huge amount of innovation. And, particularly for Laura and colleagues in the UNIC office who spend most of their time trying to dispel the notion within the commission that cinema is somehow a kind of an unimaginative, backward-looking sector lacking in innovation. Others have demonstrated our argument absolutely 110% over the last 18 months. Nothing could be further from the truth when it comes to the cinema sector.
Now, we've spoken a little bit about the ripple effects and impact of U.S. decisions on programming and how that really has been a big hurdle in content availability for the European aspect of the recovery. As you not only get ready to open in your home market, but waiting for other markets to be ready for your own theaters to be prepared for that recovery. The role of local content in that context has been massive. We really can't overstate that enough. I look at a market like Spain that did so well with a comedy sequel last year to really welcome those audiences back. We've seen that in Russia. We've seen that in France in the past. We know what local content means for a market like Turkey. For you guys looking at unique markets, in your perspective, what do you think the role of local content will be moving forward in this new normal as European cinemas look at local content not only as an alternative, but maybe a stronger complement to maybe an unstable market coming from Hollywood?
I think it was true before the pandemic that countries that had the best box office and admissions results were also countries which had a very, very strong local slate. And that will be even truer, I think, post-pandemic. As you mentioned, I mean, it's really striking when you look at, the figures. Look at Denmark. Druk has done amazing figures. The Netherlands, crazy country, where people just came back so quickly at the cinema and relied not only on Dutch films, but European films. So it's not only about, the films for your very own country, but of course, just diversifying, I think, your content overall. So we need blockbusters. No one denies that. We absolutely need them, to attract certain demographics. But you also need the whole variety of, content you can have in a cinema. And that's European films, that's, films from Asia, from, all other countries in the world, even cinema. Let's not forget even cinema. And I think the more diversified you are, you're going to, of course, answer all the needs of your audiences, and the better you're going to be. And I think that's going to be essential for cinema's recovery.
There's a particular UK angle on this because, we have benefited to a large degree from the fact we share a language with the Hollywood studios. But that's made it much more difficult with audiences to differentiate between what's British film and what's US film. And, that's sometimes not helped by some of the tax incentives and the way that, and that's all to the good. I'm not complaining about it, but the way the studios have been incentivized to badge films as British. I think there is a live conversation going on in the UK at the moment. The experience of last summer when, for reasons we needn't rehearse, many of the studios decided to move films out of that window. It was really challenging finding film content that audiences wanted to see. And we looked to a degree kind of jealously at a number of European territories who will be recognized at CineEurope for their efforts, who were able to not just rely on a strong stable of of domestic film content, but whose audiences were used to seeing that kind of film. So there wasn't a sudden, kind of dogleg where they were used to seeing US studio, domestic content. That was part of their content mix. And I think coming out of this in the UK, at least, there's a discussion about, without, at all, as Laura has said, without at all detracting from the importance of, the major US studios and the major titles they produce because they drive the major audiences, but how we arrive at a more diverse film mix and how we encourage audiences to see a more diverse range of films rather than just the ones that have the loudest voice in the market.
Thank you so much for joining me again. It's been a great time here chatting, talking about industry news to our listeners. We will be back once again on Thursday next week to go over the latest news in the theatrical exhibition business. The Box Office Podcast is produced by Box Office Pro in collaboration with the Box Office Company and Record Edit Podcast. Thanks again for listening.